Man, let me tell you, life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. I thought I had it all. A steady job, a beautiful wife, a future I could see right in front of me. Then, in one afternoon, it all unraveled. I found out the woman I thought I'd spend forever with was hiding more than I could have ever guessed. Betrayal, secrets, a twist that hit me like a punch to the gut. But that was just the start. Sometimes, the people you lose and the life you leave behind make room for something way better. Curious to see how I went from heartbreak to finding real love and building a life I never thought possible? Buckle up. This story's got more turns than you'd believe. My name is Jack. I met my wife, Laura, during my final year of college. We were both students at the time, and when I first saw her, something in me sparked. Despite my doubts about love at first sight, I could not deny how quickly I felt drawn to her. Laura was beautiful and had this warmth to her that made her approachable. Soon enough, we were spending every possible moment together, despite her having another year left to graduate. After finishing college, we did not wait long before deciding to get married. It was a simple ceremony, just the two of us and a few close friends and family members. It was during our wedding that I first met Emily, Laura's younger sister. We barely exchanged a few words, but I could sense her admiration for her older sister's happiness. Right after our honeymoon, we moved back to my hometown, where my grandparents had left me a modest 3-bedroom house. I had inherited it as a way to keep it within the family after my cousins moved out of state, so it seemed only natural to make it our home. For the first few years, everything was wonderful. Laura started working as an accountant at a well-regarded company, while I took a job as a junior engineer at a small local firm. The work was challenging, as I was often handling tasks beyond my experience, but I enjoyed it. The owner treated us well and paid us fairly, which made me appreciate the hard work and respect he showed his employees. After 4 years of marriage, I brought up the idea of having kids. Laura's response surprised me. She was hesitant, almost dismissive, saying we should live a little more before taking on that kind of responsibility. Her parents had been hinting at grandkids for a while, so I was not alone in my curiosity about when we might expand our family. But every time I asked, Laura dodged the subject or brushed it off with a joke. One day at my office, we had a technical problem. The server had completely shut down, and since our IT specialist was out, my boss turned to me for help. "Jack," he said, "you know a thing or two about computers, right?" I was not an IT expert, but I knew enough to give it a try. After about 30 minutes of poking around, I discovered that both power units in the server had failed. I suggested we order replacements immediately, but it would take at least a day for delivery. My boss insisted I handle it, so I made some calls, placed an order, and then drove across town to pick up the new parts myself. On my way back, I called Laura, hoping we could grab lunch together. To my surprise, she told me she already had plans with friends from her office. She seemed eager, even excited about their outing, so I did not press. As I drove through town, I happened to pass by a familiar neighborhood. I spotted Laura's friend, Anna, at a bus stop, and we exchanged quick greetings. "Headed somewhere special?" I asked. "Yeah," she replied with a smile. "I am visiting family for the weekend." We exchanged a few friendly words, and I moved on, feeling grateful for my quiet life and stable routine. However, as I neared the office where I was supposed to pick up the new server parts, something caught my eye. Across the street, I saw Laura. She was on the phone, walking towards an apartment building where another friend of hers, Ryan, lived. The whole situation felt odd. Laura had said she was out with coworkers, and this was nowhere near any restaurant she might usually visit. She was laughing into the phone, looking entirely carefree. I was frozen in confusion. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation, but I could not shake the suspicion creeping into my mind. I thought about calling her, but what would I say? So instead, I waited, watching from a distance. Laura walked into the building. I followed, feeling half embarrassed by my own actions, yet unable to stop myself. When I reached the door, I heard voices from upstairs. "Come on in. I've been waiting," a familiar male voice said. I immediately recognized it as Ryan's. He had been at a few of our gatherings, though I had never been fully comfortable around him. I could hear Laura laughing in response, and something in me just broke. Without even thinking, I walked up to the door and knocked. Ryan opened it, looking startled and wearing nothing but a bathrobe. He stammered a greeting, but I was already past the point of politeness. In silence, I walked past him, finding Laura standing there in shock, clutching her purse. She started to speak, but I stopped her with a single look. I felt my entire world shift, realizing I did not truly know this woman I had trusted for years. "Go home," I said in a cold, controlled voice. "Pack your things and leave." Laura tried to argue, saying it was all a misunderstanding, but I was done listening. After a few more tense moments, I turned and walked out. That day, something fundamental between us shattered. I drove back to the office, handling the rest of my tasks in a daze. The server was up and running before the end of the day, but my mind was far from my work. That night, I found myself sitting alone at a bar, nursing a drink and trying to process the mess my life had just become. The usual comfort I found in my routines was nowhere to be found. My mind was in turmoil, torn between anger, disbelief, and a sense of deep betrayal. Everything I had built with Laura suddenly felt hollow. The next few days passed in a blur. Laura called multiple times, her voice sounding desperate, pleading with me to listen, but I ignored her. I blocked her number, cut off every tie I could think of. She moved out quickly, packing her things and leaving them with her parents. The house felt emptier than ever, but I could not let myself feel weak. I threw myself into my work, doing everything I could to numb the pain. The last thing I wanted was to think about what had gone wrong. After a while, I realized I could not avoid people forever. One day, I bumped into Anna again, who seemed aware of the whole situation. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. She did not push for details, and for that I was grateful. The pain was still fresh, and talking about it felt like reopening the wound. But Anna's presence reminded me that not everyone would betray me. There were people who cared, even if it felt like my world had fallen apart. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a numb rhythm. Laura was gone, and so was the warmth of the life we had tried to build. But I kept going, convincing myself that work was all I needed. Just as I was beginning to feel a small sense of stability, things took an unexpected turn. One Friday evening, I was about to leave work when I received a text message from Emily, Laura's younger sister. She mentioned she was in town and asked if we could meet up. Given everything that had happened, I was hesitant. Emily had been close with her sister, and I was unsure where her loyalties lay. But something in her message seemed genuine, so I agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. When I arrived, Emily greeted me with a warm smile, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "I heard about what happened, Jack," she said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." Her kindness caught me off guard. We talked for hours, far longer than I had expected. Emily shared stories about her life and her new job, and she did her best to lighten the mood. Talking to her was surprisingly easy, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. She didn't push me for details or try to justify her sister's actions. Instead, she listened, offering simple support. I appreciated her presence and the chance to just talk without judgment. As our friendship grew, Emily shared something that changed my understanding of Laura. One evening, as we were walking through the park, she mentioned that Laura had a history with Ryan long before we were married. Apparently, they had dated back in college and had reconnected a few years before our wedding. Emily had always suspected there was unfinished business between them, but she never imagined Laura would go as far as she had. Hearing this stung, but it also helped me make sense of the betrayal. Knowing Laura's connection to Ryan wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake added another layer to the pain, yet it also gave me closure. It was as if all the missing pieces of the puzzle had finally come together, allowing me to see the situation clearly for the first time. A few more months passed, and Emily and I continued to see each other. What started as casual coffee chats turned into dinners, movies, and eventually moments of shared silence. I began to see her not just as Laura's sister, but as someone I genuinely cared about. She was smart, kind, and grounded, qualities I found myself drawn to. Despite the painful connection to my past, I could not deny the comfort she brought into my life. In many ways, she was helping me heal without even realizing it. Just when I thought life was finally settling into a peaceful routine, another surprise hit me. One afternoon, I received a letter from a law firm handling my grandparents' estate. I was confused, as I thought all the inheritance matters had been resolved years ago when they passed away. Curious, I opened the letter and read through the contents. To my shock, my grandparents had left me a significant portion of their old family business, a small but profitable construction company they had built from scratch. I was named the sole heir of the company, and they had made arrangements to keep it running until I was ready to take over. I could barely process this unexpected windfall. The company had been in my family for generations, but I never thought I would be the one to run it. Part of me was thrilled by the opportunity to carry on their legacy, but another part of me felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. My life had just been turned upside down, and now I was being asked to take on something completely new. After talking to the lawyer, I decided to visit the company's headquarters. Walking through the modest office and meeting the staff gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. My grandparents' legacy was alive in this place, and the people working there clearly respected what my family had built. I could see it in their faces and hear it in their voices. They were proud to be part of something meaningful, something that had lasted through decades. Running the business would not be easy, and I knew it would take time to learn the ropes. But in that moment, standing in my grandfather's old office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I knew I had to honor their memory by keeping the business thriving. That evening, I called Emily to tell her the news. She was thrilled, and her excitement felt like a reassuring presence during this whirlwind of change. "Jack, this is incredible," she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. "Your grandparents would be so proud. You're going to do amazing things with this." Hearing her say that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Her belief in me reminded me that maybe, just maybe, I could build something meaningful again. Life was starting to make sense, piece by piece, and I was beginning to see a future beyond the pain of betrayal and the endless cycle of work. But life had a way of testing me just when I thought things were falling into place. Not long after I took over the family business, I started receiving unexpected calls from Laura. At first, I ignored them, not wanting to revisit the past. But she was persistent, leaving voicemails and even sending emails, claiming that she wanted to talk one last time. Part of me was tempted to see her, if only to finally end things face to face. But I also feared that talking to her might stir up old wounds. Then, one afternoon, I ran into her outside the coffee shop where Emily and I often met. Laura looked different. Tired, anxious, almost desperate. She seemed genuinely taken aback to see me, but quickly composed herself and asked if we could sit down and talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. There was a small part of me that wanted to hear her side of the story, even if I knew it would not change anything. As we sat down, Laura began to explain her version of events, trying to justify her actions. She claimed that reconnecting with Ryan had been an accident, that she had been going through a tough time, and had made a mistake. Listening to her, I felt a mixture of anger and pity. Her words sounded hollow, almost rehearsed, and I could see she was struggling to convince even herself. She apologized, saying she regretted everything, and she even hinted that she wanted a second chance. I could not help but laugh, though it was a bitter sound. The idea that she thought I would simply take her back after everything felt absurd. Seeing her like this, I realized that the love I had once felt for her was gone. There was no trust left, no foundation to build on. I told her as much, explaining that while I could forgive her in time, I would never take her back. I needed to move forward, to build a life with someone who truly valued honesty and commitment. Laura's expression shifted from regret to anger. She muttered something under her breath about how I had ruined her life by telling Ryan's wife about their affair, which led to Ryan's wife kicking him out. It was then I realized how little she had truly changed. She was more upset about the consequences than the pain she had caused. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked away without looking back. Later that evening, I called Emily and told her about the encounter. She listened patiently, her voice calm and reassuring as I recounted every word Laura had said. Emily had seen me at my worst, yet she stood by me through it all. In that moment, I knew she was the person I wanted by my side. Her support was unwavering, genuine, and her compassion was exactly what I needed. After I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Laura was finally out of my life for good, and I was ready to move forward. Emily had helped me heal, not by fixing everything, but by simply being there. And as I looked around my empty house, I realized it did not feel so empty anymore. After that encounter with Laura, my life took on a new rhythm. Emily and I grew closer, though we both took things slowly. She understood that I needed time to rebuild myself, to heal from the wound Laura had left. Each day felt lighter, more hopeful, and my focus shifted to making the most out of the family business I had inherited. The company started thriving under my care, and for the first time, I felt a deep sense of pride and purpose in my work. With Emily's encouragement, I began expanding the business. I hired new people, brought in updated technology, and launched several new projects. My grandfather's company had always been known for its reliability and quality, but I wanted to bring it into the modern age without losing the values that had made it successful for generations. The employees appreciated the changes, and seeing the business flourish felt like a tribute to my grandparents' hard work. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emily came over with a home-cooked meal. She had always been a great cook, and she loved surprising me with dishes she thought I would enjoy. We sat together, eating in comfortable silence, occasionally laughing about little things. She had this way of making everything feel simple and good. As we finished our meal, she looked at me and asked, "Jack, have you thought about where you want to take this company?" It was a question I had been asking myself often. I wanted to honor my family's legacy, but I also wanted to leave my own mark. "I have thought about it," I replied slowly. "I want to keep the core of what my grandparents built. They stood for something real, you know? Hard work, quality, integrity. But I also want to push the boundaries, make this business something that would make them proud today." Emily smiled, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "I think they'd be incredibly proud of you, Jack. You're doing things they probably never dreamed of, but I know they'd love seeing you take charge like this." Her confidence in me felt like an anchor, keeping me grounded. We talked about the future, our dreams, and somewhere in the middle of our conversation, I realized something. I wanted her in my life permanently. Emily was not just someone I was dating or leaning on for support. She was my partner in every sense of the word. As time passed, I started thinking more seriously about our future. It was not a question of if, but when. I wanted to ask her to move in, to share this life I was building, but I hesitated, not wanting to rush things. We were both cautious, mindful of everything we had been through. But the desire to be with her, to build a real life together, was becoming undeniable. In the meantime, I focused on a particularly challenging project at work. We had been contracted to construct a community center on the edge of town, a project that held significant meaning for me. The center was intended to be a place for kids, families, and community gatherings, a place where people could come together and feel connected. It felt like more than just a job. It was something that could make a lasting impact on the town. One morning, while overseeing the construction site, I was approached by a man I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Thomas, a former business associate of my grandfather. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and he carried himself with a kind of casual arrogance that made me uneasy. Thomas told me he had a business proposition, something he insisted would take my family's company to the next level. I listened politely as he laid out his plan. Essentially, he wanted to partner with us, bringing in investors who would help us expand rapidly. On paper, it sounded like a smart move, but something about Thomas felt off. His promises seemed too grand, too immediate, and I could sense there was more to the deal than he was letting on. He urged me to consider it, adding that he had been close friends with my grandfather and knew what was best for the company. Over the next few days, I did some digging. I found out that Thomas had been involved in several shady dealings, some of which had resulted in lawsuits and financial troubles for those who had partnered with him. Realizing this, I decided to decline his offer. I thanked him for his interest but made it clear that I would not be involving my company in any ventures that compromised its integrity. When I told Emily about the encounter, she seemed relieved. "Trust your instincts, Jack," she said. "You know this business better than anyone, and you're doing an amazing job with it. Don't let anyone pressure you into something that doesn't feel right." Her words gave me confidence, and I knew I had made the right decision. Still, Thomas's visit lingered in my mind. It felt like a warning, a reminder that the world of business could be just as deceitful as the personal life I had been through. I was determined to keep the company on a path of integrity, honoring my family's values without succumbing to the temptations of easy money. Just as I was settling back into the routine, however, I received an unexpected call from Laura's parents. They had heard about my success with the business and wanted to congratulate me. Their voices sounded friendly, but there was an edge to their tone, as if they were fishing for information. I found it odd, especially since we had barely spoken since the divorce. As the conversation progressed, I realized they were not just calling to congratulate me. They were subtly suggesting that I reconsider my decision to divorce Laura, hinting that she was still struggling without me. I tried to remain polite, but their words irritated me. It was as if they had no understanding of the pain Laura's actions had caused, as if they expected me to just overlook everything that had happened. I ended the call as gracefully as I could, but the encounter left a bitter taste. That night, I shared the experience with Emily. She listened quietly, her face thoughtful. "They don't know you like I do, Jack," she finally said. "They're still living in the past, clinging to an image of what they think life should be. But you're stronger now. You're not the same person you were back then." Her words sank in, and I realized she was right. I had grown in ways I hadn't even recognized. The pain of betrayal, the challenges of running a business, the support of someone who truly believed in me. All of it had shaped me into someone new. I was no longer the person who would let others define my path. I had a vision, a purpose, and the will to follow through, no matter who tried to sway me otherwise. In the coming months, I focused fully on expanding the business and nurturing my relationship with Emily. We spent weekends exploring new areas, going on hikes, and dreaming about a future that seemed more real with each passing day. There were moments of uncertainty, yes, but there was also a quiet strength between us, a resilience that had been forged in the fire of our shared experiences. One evening, as we sat together in my living room, Emily looked at me with a curious expression. "Jack, have you ever thought about moving? Starting fresh somewhere new?" Her question caught me off guard. "I have thought about it," I admitted. "But this house, it's the last connection I have to my family. It feels like a part of my roots, you know?" Emily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get it, but sometimes moving forward means letting go of the past." I considered her words carefully. She was right, of course, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. Still, the thought lingered, and over the next few days, I found myself imagining what a new life might look like. A life where Emily and I could build something entirely our own, free from the ghosts of our pasts. As we navigated this new phase of our relationship, I realized I was no longer haunted by Laura or the mistakes of my previous marriage. Emily had brought light into my life in a way I hadn't thought possible. She was more than a companion. She was my partner, my equal, and someone I knew I could trust unconditionally. And then, just as I was beginning to believe in the peace we had found, a shadow from my past reemerged in the most unexpected way. As things with Emily and the business continued to grow, life felt almost too calm, too easy. But that calm was shattered one afternoon when I received a call from Thomas, the shady business associate I had turned down months ago. He wanted to follow up on his previous offer, claiming he had some new opportunities that could benefit my company. His persistence was unnerving, and I was blunt with him, reiterating that I had no interest in any partnership with him. I thought that would be the end of it. However, a few days later, I started noticing unusual activity within the company. Some of our accounts were flagged for suspicious transactions, and there were discrepancies in financial reports that had always been airtight. I immediately launched an internal audit, trying to figure out what was going wrong. The deeper I looked, the more unsettling it became. Someone had been tampering with our accounts, siphoning small amounts of money over time, almost as if testing the waters. My first thought was Thomas, but I had no evidence to link him to it. Still, I could not shake the feeling that he had something to do with this. I tightened security, changed protocols, and made sure only trusted employees had access to sensitive information. Emily stood by me through every step, helping me track down leads and secure our systems. Together, we managed to identify the gaps and put a stop to the suspicious activity. But the incident left me with a lingering distrust, a feeling that I had to stay vigilant at all times. In the midst of this, Laura reached out to me again, this time with a message that took me by surprise. She claimed to have information about Thomas and his connections to our company. Her message was cryptic, implying that she had insider knowledge and could help me protect my family's legacy, if I was willing to talk to her. I did not want to get tangled up with her again, but the potential risk to my business left me little choice. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe in town. As I walked in, I saw Laura sitting in a corner booth, her expression guarded. She looked different, worn, almost weary. I could tell she was nervous, and part of me wondered what she was about to reveal. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Jack," she started, her voice low. "I just thought you should know what kind of man Thomas is. He's been involved in fraud schemes for years, and he's been targeting small, family-owned businesses like yours. He tries to gain their trust, then siphons money and resources until there's nothing left." Her words matched what I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed by Laura was chilling. I asked her how she knew all this, and after a long pause, she admitted that Ryan, the man she had left me for, had been one of Thomas's partners. Apparently, Thomas had used Ryan as a pawn in one of his previous schemes, and when the plan fell apart, Ryan was left to face the legal consequences. That was why Laura had returned to town. She had been trying to rebuild her life after the fallout of Thomas's deceit. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I could see that she, too, had been used, deceived by the same man who now threatened my business. But I reminded myself that she had chosen that path, that she had broken our marriage to pursue a relationship with Ryan. Whatever sympathy I felt was quickly overshadowed by the realization that she had contributed to the chaos in my life. "Why are you telling me this, Laura?" I asked, struggling to keep my tone steady. She looked down, fidgeting with her hands. "Because I owe you, Jack. I messed up, and I know I can't fix what I did. But if there's one thing I can do, it's to help you protect what you've built. Thomas won't stop until he gets what he wants." I could sense the sincerity in her words, but I still had my doubts. Trust was not something I could easily give her, not after everything that had happened. I thanked her for the information but made it clear that we were not going to become friends again. Laura seemed to understand, nodding in resignation. "Just be careful, Jack. Thomas is ruthless and he won't back down easily," she said before standing up to leave. That night, I confided in Emily, sharing every detail of my conversation with Laura. She listened attentively, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "We'll handle this, Jack," she assured me. "Your grandparents built this company on trust and integrity, and no one is going to tear that down." With her support, I took further precautions, hiring a private investigator to gather more information on Thomas and his business dealings. The investigator uncovered a network of fraud, revealing that Thomas had indeed targeted multiple family-owned companies, bleeding them dry before moving on to his next victim. The evidence was overwhelming, and I felt a surge of relief knowing we had a case against him. We reported everything to the authorities, and with the evidence we had gathered, they opened an investigation into Thomas's activities. It was a long, drawn-out process, but eventually, he was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The relief of seeing justice served was immense, though the ordeal had left me more guarded, more cautious. In the aftermath, I made it my mission to protect the business even more fiercely. I implemented tighter security protocols, restructured the financial system, and brought in people I knew I could trust. The experience had shaken me, but it also solidified my commitment to keeping my grandparents' legacy safe. With the Thomas ordeal finally behind us, Emily and I found a new sense of peace. We celebrated the victory together, grateful for each other's support through the challenges. Our bond had grown stronger, and it was becoming clear that we were ready for the next step. One evening, over dinner, I looked at her and said, "Emily, would you consider moving in with me?" Her face lit up, and for a moment, I could see the answer in her smile. "I thought you'd never ask," she replied, laughing. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of packing, moving, and blending our lives into one. The house felt warmer, more alive with Emily there. We filled it with laughter, shared dreams, and plans for the future. One weekend, as we were unpacking some of her belongings, Emily stumbled upon an old photo album. She opened it, revealing pictures of her family, childhood memories, and a few photos of her and Laura as kids. Seeing her with Laura made me pause, realizing how complicated this journey had been for both of us. Emily noticed my reaction and gently closed the album, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. "I know this hasn't been easy, Jack," she said quietly, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Everything that's happened brought us here, to this moment." Her words reassured me, reminding me that the past, with all its pain and betrayal, had also led us to something beautiful. We were building a life together, one founded on trust and mutual respect, values that had been sorely lacking in my previous marriage. With Emily by my side, I found myself looking forward to each new day. We began talking about our future in more concrete terms, our goals, dreams, and the family we wanted to build. Life had finally taken on a sense of stability, something I had not felt in a long time. Yet, in the back of my mind, there was a quiet awareness that life rarely followed a predictable path. One Saturday morning, as we were having breakfast on the porch, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I almost ignored it, not wanting to break the peaceful moment. But something compelled me to answer. "Hello, Jack," a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Laura. I felt my stomach drop. What could she possibly want now? After everything we had been through, after the warning she had given about Thomas, I thought our paths had finally diverged for good. "Laura, what is it?" I asked, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. There was a pause, and then she said, "I just wanted to let you know. Ryan's in trouble. He's gotten involved in something even worse than before, and I thought you should know in case it comes back to you somehow." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Although I had cut ties with Laura and Ryan long ago, I could not ignore the possibility that their mistakes might have ripple effects that could reach me and the business. But I also knew that I could not allow myself to get dragged into their chaos again. "Laura, whatever he's involved in, that's his problem. It has nothing to do with me anymore," I replied firmly. She hesitated, as if searching for something more to say. "I understand, Jack. I just wanted to warn you. I'll leave you alone now." And with that, the call ended. I put my phone down, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Emily looked at me, concern evident in her eyes. I explained the conversation briefly, and she placed a reassuring hand on mine. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together," she said, her voice steady. In that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I had the strength to handle it. Not because of the life I had left behind, but because of the life I was building with Emily. The shadows of the past would always be there, but they no longer had the power to control me. After that unexpected call from Laura, I felt a strange mix of relief and caution. The warning about Ryan was unsettling, but it also reminded me of how far I had come. My life with Emily felt solid, and the business was thriving, yet the remnants of my past still seemed to linger, like shadows that refused to fade completely. Emily and I continued building our life together, moving forward one day at a time. Our relationship had become a source of strength and stability for me, something I hadn't known was possible. She brought out the best in me, and in the quiet moments we shared, I found a kind of peace that I had never experienced before. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Emily preparing dinner. The scent of spices and roasting vegetables filled the air, and the sight of her in the kitchen made me realize just how much I wanted this. Every day, for the rest of my life. The decision felt right, clear, and simple. As we sat down to eat, I looked at her and took a deep breath. "Emily, I began. I know we've talked about the future, about what we want, but I want you to know that for me, the future is here with you. I want us to build our life together, to make this official. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small box and opening it to reveal a ring. Will you marry me? Her eyes widened, a look of surprise quickly giving way to tears of joy. Yes, Jack, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, 1,000 times yes. In that moment, everything else fell away. The doubts, the past, the lingering memories. They all faded as Emily and I embraced, committing ourselves to each other fully. I knew that with her by my side, I could face anything that came our way. The life we were building together felt strong and unbreakable. We spent the next few weeks planning a small wedding, something simple and intimate, with just our closest friends and family. It felt surreal to be starting fresh, building a future free from the shadows that had once haunted me. Emily was the family I had chosen, the person I knew I could trust beyond a doubt. On the day of the wedding, I stood at the altar, waiting for her to walk down the aisle. My heart raced with anticipation, and when I finally saw her, dressed in a simple white gown and smiling radiantly, I knew without a doubt that this was exactly where I was meant to be. Our vows were personal, heartfelt, and as we exchanged rings, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. The wedding reception was a joyful celebration, full of laughter, love, and the people who had supported us through thick and thin. My friends and family welcomed Emily with open arms, and as we danced together, I realized that I had finally found a sense of belonging that I had been searching for all along. But as we settled into our life as newlyweds, an unexpected development threatened to disrupt the peace we had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, just as I was wrapping up a meeting at the office, I received a call from my private investigator. He had some new information about Thomas, the man who had tried to sabotage my business months earlier. Jack, I know you thought the Thomas situation was over, but I found something you need to see, he said, his voice grave. It turns out Thomas was not working alone. He had a partner, someone who was feeding him inside information about your company. The revelation was shocking, and my mind raced as I tried to process the implications. I had thought we had rooted out every threat, secured the company from any vulnerabilities, but this news suggested that there was still someone on the inside who had betrayed me. Do you know who it is? I asked, barely able to contain my frustration. Yes, the investigator replied. It's an employee named Mark. He's been with the company for years, so he knows the ins and outs of the business. We have evidence that he was in contact with Thomas, feeding him information about your accounts and clients. It appears he was promised a substantial payout once Thomas's scheme succeeded. The news was like a punch to the gut. Mark had been one of my most trusted employees, someone I had always considered loyal. I couldn't believe he had betrayed us, not just me, but the legacy my grandparents had worked so hard to build. I called Emily as soon as I had processed the information. She listened carefully, her voice calm and reassuring. We'll get through this, Jack. You've already handled so much. This is just one more hurdle, and I know you're strong enough to overcome it. Her words gave me strength, and with her support, I confronted Mark the next day. I laid out the evidence, the emails, and the records that linked him to Thomas. Mark, to his credit, didn't deny anything.